In the next edition of It's About Money, my guest will be Scott Beck, the owner of Rochester Student Housing. A lot of wonderful things to talk about. I know so many people are interested in rentals. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome to another edition of It's About Money. I'm Nanette Nokan and thank you for joining us. I'm delighted to have Scott Beck, an expert in student housing or in housing, to be here. His company is called Rochester Student Housing. Thank you for being here, Scott.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, how did you get started in the business of rental? You know, there's so many people say, I want to buy a house and rent it out. How did you get started?
I actually started in the spring of 2009, I would say, which is when I lost my job. I had worked in investment banking for 5 years in Washington, D.C. and in Charlotte, North Carolina, focusing predominantly on mergers and acquisitions. And if you recall, in 2008, the markets collapsed, our business dried up, I was laid off. I grew up in Rochester, missed family, missed friends, missed the city, so determined I wanted to come back home. And when I returned, I realized it was going to be a challenge because there weren't many, say, investment banks, there weren't many private equity firms. So I recognized I was going to be starting a new career and a new path. And so when I got back, I used to go to a coffee shop, which was right next to one of the local universities. And you know, I would sit there for hours every day on my laptop doing research, trying to figure out what was my new direction, what was going to be my new career. And I recognized that the local universities were really propelling the Rochester economy. In essence, they were the, say, new Kodaks, the new Xeroxes, the new Bausch and Lombs of Rochester. And so I asked myself the question, how can I leverage these new economic growth drivers in Rochester and create a business? Well, when I asked that question, I'm sitting in this coffee shop, there's students milling around, they're walking, you know, to the coffee shop, to campus, to housing, and I said, well, what about student housing? And so that's really how I got the idea and how I started the business.
Oh, that's brilliant. Didn't know you were right there.
Yep.
That's fantastic. And those are great questions to ask because many people feel victimized by the change in employment because of the economic conditions, whereas you embrace it and say, let's take a look at what other opportunities.
Yeah, I remember the day I was laid off and I told my employer, who I still have a great relationship, I said, thank you, this is an opportunity and it's going to be a start of something new. And then I said at the time, I think this will be the best day for my career, and I would definitely say that looking back. So it's really just an opportunity the way I look at it.
I love your perspective, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to ask you to be on the show. I think that, you know, be a winner instead of being a victim. So you obviously had to start with one house. How many rentals do you have now?
I have approximately 30 rental units. They're all single-family houses or duplexes, all located walking distance to campus. So purchased the first house back on March 23rd, 2010. You always remember the first one. I couldn't tell you any of the dates of the others, but started then and have gradually scaled up.
So really, in a short amount of time, you've built up quite a number of properties. Would you say that it's easier to manage a bunch of them than just one?
I would say that it was easier to manage one than a bunch of them. You know, it's interesting, when I was at, say, 15, you're sort of a little too small, and then as you get a little bigger, I'm bringing on more maintenance staff, but then there's the whole the human capital management aspect. So you have different challenges as you grow larger from an organizational perspective, where now you're managing people and whatnot.
So, that's good. So what has been the biggest challenges that you have faced?
I would say there's a couple. The one thing I didn't realize about student housing is the management intensiveness of it. You have to remember, most of my tenants are between the ages of 19 to 22.
Yes.
It's the first time that they're living away from home, the first time that they're away from mom and dad. So there's a maturity issue. There's also a just sort of life skills issue, where I'll have, say, a 4.0 pre-med student at the U of R, but he doesn't know how to change the light bulb, or he doesn't know, you know, how to bring in the trash. A great example, I always love to tell this story, is all my units have washers and dryers, and I always get a lot of phone calls, oh, the dryer doesn't work. And so I used to go to the house, look at the dryer, and 50% of the time it was just because they weren't shutting the door to the dryer. So now I'll have a tenant call, and I'll say, well, can you do me a favor while we're on the phone? Could you walk down in the basement, just close the dryer drawer and press on. We'll see if it works. Well, guess what? 50% of the time, that's the issue. So definitely the management intensiveness just because of the age of the population. The second thing would just be the turnover. You know, with student housing, you'll have them for a year, maybe 2 at best. Typically, you know, you'll get them as seniors, then they graduate, and then they move on, move to another city. So every year it's a real hustle to get that new crop in. And then in addition, you also have the turnover occurring over the same week or 2 during that year. So, you know, around graduation, the end of May, I'll have 30 units that turn over in a 10-day period. So you'll have 80 people moving in, 80 people moving out, and then a new 80 people moving in. So the months that are leading up to that turnover and then the months shortly thereafter are always very busy. And then I would say the last thing would just be, for me, especially not coming from a construction background, just getting, from a renovation perspective, being able to budget accurately. A lot of my properties have required significant renovations. They were, say, foreclosures or short sales, distressed properties, vacant houses. And so, you know, early on I had difficulty determining accurate cost budgets. Seemed like I was always underestimating, never overestimating, where, you know, I would think a bathroom would cost $4,500 and instead it was $7,500. But, you know, as I've gained more experience and you've just learned really through mistakes, you know, I've gotten better at that aspect of it.
So it sounds like it can be time intensive from a perspective of the people that you're renting to. You're right, they're young, so they don't have that experience. And,
Absolutely.
yeah. And you generally catch them at the later part of their college education because they generally live on campus, right?
Correct. Typically, they're allowed to move off campus when they're juniors or seniors. So they're 2 years in the dorms, but again, the dorms aren't really like living in a single-family house for the first time.
Sure. So, and hopefully they'll get along.
Yep.
And what would you say has been the, I can't say easiest, but what has come more naturally in terms of the challenges?
I think one of the great things is just the relationships that I've built with the neighbors. You know, rental housing isn't always the most popular thing in a neighborhood, and especially student housing for that matter. And so that's the one thing in particular that I've always placed a focus on, is trying to build relationships with those neighbors to show them that I'm not a landlord that you're never going to see but once a month when they're there to collect the rent. And the neighbors have been very, very receptive. Most of them all have my phone number. They'll call me if there is an issue, and it's really been beneficial. And I think they appreciate the fact of having, say, a landlord that does take care of his property and does take care of the neighborhood.
That's unusual because most people don't want to give it their cell phones.
Mm-hmm.
They send somebody else to collect the rent.
Yep.
A lot of absentee people. I remember I went to school at Cornell, and that was an issue. There were so many absentee landlords. You know,
Mm-hmm.
They never showed up except to collect the money. You know, so
Yep.
That's remarkable. So getting the relationships with the neighbors, and it sounds like they're generally friendly.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think as long as they see that you make an effort, you know, they really appreciate that.
That's great. It's nice that you've put so much thought into it. Now, what made you? What did you make this? How did you make the selection of the area that you wanted to focus? You mentioned that you were near your university and near school. Talk
Yep.
about that a little bit.
Well, I started focusing on Brooks Landing, which is designated by the intersection of Brooks Avenue and Genesee Street. It's a section of the 19th Ward. There's a footbridge that connects Brooks Landing to the U of R campus, and it is the closest neighborhood to the U of R campus, the closest proximity as far as walking distance for students. And a lot of students don't have vehicles, so they walk every day to class, or they ride their bikes. So proximity is very important to them. So that was one of the reasons I chose that neighborhood in particular. In addition, Brooks Landing over the past 7-8 years has seen a lot of development. There was the Riverview Dorms, which is about a 400-bed student housing facility that was built on South Plymouth Avenue. That was followed by Staybridge Suites Hotel, the Brooks Landing Business Center. Currently they're building another 11-story student housing building on the corner of Brooks and Genesee. So there's been a lot of investment, a lot of momentum that has occurred in that neighborhood over the last several years, which is really what drew me to the neighborhood to begin with.
That's great. So has enrollment gone up for the university that demands a lot more
Yep.
housing?
Enrollment has gone up at the U of R as well as RIT. So every year they're adding more and more students.
No, that's great. That's wonderful. I know that you are one of those unique people that take the extra mile for your tenants.
Mm-hmm.
And I was impressed with what you'd said about what you do. Can you describe that for our viewers?
Sure. I would say a high percentage of my students are international students, and quite often the first time that they step foot in Rochester off that plane is really the first time they've stepped foot in the United States. So I'll pick them, a lot of times we'll arrange transportation for them from the airport to the house, but when you see them, they're sort of a deer in the headlight look. It can be very intimidating. You're in a new country for the first time, you don't know anyone, you don't know where anything is. So I've tried to help them assimilate when they first get here. So we'll arrange, campus tours showing them how to, where to go to class, where their classes will be, how to get there from the house. We'll also arrange transportation just to pick up the basic necessities, to pick up groceries, provide information on public transportation options. A lot of my international students are actually Indians and Asians, so there's Rochester has a lot of great Indian and Asian grocery stores. So we'll give them a list of those and take them to those different grocery stores just to help them, get started and get in comfortably.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We host students through Global Connections, and I know that they really appreciate knowing those different places because sometimes you just crave for home cooking, you know
Yep.
what I mean? So, or at least the flavors of that you're accustomed to.
Which, if I'm lucky, sometimes they'll cook me a home cooked meal.
Oh, how nice is that? That's a nice way to say thank you. Well, I think that's a really nice thing because I think in our community, it's wonderful when the students can feel like somebody cared about them here instead of just passing through, going to class, and then 4 years later graduating.
Absolutely.
I think it really gives, I think, not only a sense of warmth for our culture in America, if you do that, and it's not just Rochester, it's about the United States, and it gives them that perspective. And I think that's really a wonderful welcome to the students. Instead, you're right, they're deer in the headlights. What do they know about?
And it's fun to watch because a lot of my properties, so I'll have a 3-bedroom house, and at times you'll have 3 students that are all from different countries. So you might have a student from, say, Ethiopia, a student from India, a student from Brazil, and they'll all live together and experience each other's cultures and whatnot.
To get their mini international
Yep.
housing there. You actually have great occupancy rate, so that means that you're doing something to get those students to come to you. What are those marketing strategies that you've used?
I would say most of my business is just referral-related business, just friends referring their friends to me, or friends, if I'll have a house that is a group of seniors, they might have friends that are juniors that are living on campus, and they'll recommend me to their friends for the following school year. So, and as a landlord, that's really the biggest compliment you can get is that referral where, they're sending their friends your way. So I would say that would, without a doubt, be the largest method I use. I wouldn't say it's a method, but just referrals. There's also just general advertising, say on Craigslist and websites such as that. But I would say, without a doubt, the referrals are important.
Great, that's great. We're going to take a quick break. My guest is Scott Beck. He's the owner of Rochester Student Housing. We'll be right back.
Oh!
Checking your fantasy league?
Nah, just my 401k statement.
Nice. Where'd you find the money for that?
I just been saving a little every month.
I can't seem to save anything.
Well, what about all this? What about the money you're spending?
What money? It's gone before I can get my hands on it.
I got a pizza for a Todd.
Hey, can somebody spot me?
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind.
It's 547.
Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org.
It's true what they say about America. Here, we have the opportunity to be anything and do anything we set our minds to. minds can achieve anything, so we make sure a college education is possible for every dedicated mind. We're Federal Student Aid. We provide more than $150 billion in grants, loans, and work-study funds to help 15 million students pay for college each year, making us the largest provider of student financial aid in the country. As part of the U.S. Department of Education, we offer free resources and tools to make every step of the process easier, from applying for financial aid to repaying loans. At Federal Student Aid, we dedicate our minds to funding America's future, one student at a time, all for one very important reason. So a mind like this one will have a chance to go on and do great things.
And we're back. My guest is Scott Beck, and he's the owner of Rochester Student Housing. And so, Scott, these are great things that you're sharing with our viewers, because many are asking about real estate and thinking about it, and you've obviously done a great job in such a short amount of time, really very successful, but you've got all these bits that make you competitive and really rise above. How price conscious are renters these days?
I would say it's like anything else. They're shoppers. So if you're going to go buy a new car or a new house, you're probably going to look at 5 or 6 cars or 5 or 6 houses. So when I'm giving a tour to prospective renters, I realize they've probably looked at 4 or 5 other apartments, or they're going to go look at 4 or 5 other apartments. And so it depends. Price is important, which the market determines that, but then also amenities. So some people are adamant about having a dishwasher, so they're willing to pay a few extra bucks to have one. Or I'll have, say, 4-bedroom houses that have 2 full bathrooms, and I have 4 bedrooms that have 1 full bathroom. Well, my 4 bedrooms with 1 full bathroom rent at a lower price point. And so you'll have some renters that are looking for a more affordable option. So they'll choose that option versus the more expensive. So it's really a lot of things that they look at, price being one of them, but then also the condition of the house, the amenities, all sorts of things.
So one of the amenities that you have is washer and dryer, and that's not available in a lot of places because many would have to go to a laundromat to do that. What made you decide that that's an important factor of having in the rentals?
I think most single-family home rentals and duplexes do have washers and dryers. The apartment complexes, typically they'll have coin-op machines, but let's be honest, no one really wants to have to walk 2 blocks with their laundry to a laundromat to pay, 8 quarters to do their laundry and come back 3 hours later. So I think it's a convenience thing for my tenants.
Sure. I remember being in college, and if you don't come back on time to take out your clothes from the washing machine or the dryer, it's like above the machine. So you have to practically sit there and watch the whole thing happen.
Yep.
So
and then you lose your whole Saturday afternoon.
Right.
That, yeah.
And then everybody competes, and if you don't have enough quarters, what do you do? So that's really convenient to have that available to the tenants. Beyond running a responsible and profitable business, I know that you really care about the community, and like you've mentioned earlier about the neighbors, but you've really done more things beyond that. You're probably shy to talk about it, but I'd like to ask you to share that, because I think that I think that our community is really, to make it a wonderful place to live, it's about giving back. Would you talk about that, please?
Well, I think it's any community that you operate your business in, it's your responsibility to invest in that community, to try to give back to that community. And I know when I first started, a lot of the housing stock was deteriorated. It would be, I purchased houses that were vacant for 5-6 years. They were boarded up. They were drug houses. And when I would renovate them, when they were done, it was this beautiful finished product. And it was nice to see the housing stock in that neighborhood improve. It was great to see the housing values appreciate. I think the neighbors love the fact that their house is now appreciated. With that said, though, it wasn't solving any of these, say, underlying systematic problems, which, were, say, poverty, unemployment, lack of opportunities for minority city or inner city youth that plague some of those neighborhoods. So over the last year or two, I've really tried to focus on those areas and what I can do to try to improve some of those aspects.
And so can you be more specific?
Sure.
What are some of those things?
A couple of things I do is, one of the things is with, I'm heavily involved with the Genesee Valley Little League. It's a league that's been around for 50 years and went defunct 7 or 8 years ago. And then 2 years ago, there was a gentleman that decided he wanted to restart the league. And so I started working with him, putting it together and helping him with fundraising and sponsorships. Our first year, we had 3 teams, so we partnered with other local Little Leagues, so the 19th Ward youngsters could play against them. And then this past year, we had 8 teams, probably 80, yeah, I think it was 80 kids participated. And so we more than doubled the league in just a year. You know, we had a big parade down Genesee Street a couple weeks ago with 200 plus participants. So it was a great thing for the community. Another thing I do is every Thanksgiving I do a turkey giveaway where I give away 50 turkeys to low-income families that live in that neighborhood. And you know, even if it's one night a year that the family gets to sit down and eat dinner together, I think that's important. And then also there's a lot of elderly neighbors that are around my property. So I've worked with both my maintenance staff and then some of my tenants that we have created just a volunteer program where both spring and fall we'll do cleanups of the yards. And so the neighbors really appreciate that, and it's always fun to see, you know, a 80-year-old neighbor talking to a 20-year-old college kid. I think both generations really enjoy that aspect of it. And then currently trying to just create a mentorship program for inner city youth, where offering them part-time and summertime jobs and partnering them with some of my contractors, some of my maintenance men, just to learn some basic skills such as electrical and plumbing skills, and just, yeah, carpentry, learning the trades, because there's a lot of opportunities in those fields. So
That's great. I mean, that's really creating a sense of community, you know, from playing, which is a very important part of learning and being a part of a community, to teaching them skills that they might be able to use in the future. Even if they don't go to that trade, it'd be good to know how to use a hammer.
Absolutely.
So when they go to college, they might know how to change the light bulb,
Yep.
use a dryer,
Absolutely.
washer and dryer. I think that's remarkable. And like you said, the interaction between the young people and the elderly in the community really makes everybody care. And I think that's what it's all about.
It makes a lot better connection. And young people, a lot of times, you know, I'll have students and they just walk to class with their heads down, and it helps them become more connected to that neighborhood. Even though they're only there temporarily for a year, it just helps build relationships.
Sure, and it makes it safer for everybody,
Yep.
because you look after each other and say, oh, gee, you know, that person, that student usually comes by at this time, what happened, you know, or whatever.
Absolutely.
So what would you say? Would you say that you do this full time? This is your business. Do you think this is going to be more of a challenge for someone to do it part time? Like if you have a full time job and you've got a house to do, I mean, to rent.
No, I think it's definitely manageable. Obviously, as you get larger and larger, yes, it takes a lot more of your time. But you know, when I first started out, I had a full-time job and I was doing both. And then at some point, it became too difficult to do both. But without a doubt, you can definitely, it's a nice, as a rental investment, it's a nice thing to do on the side.
That's great. So it's just really paying attention to it, doing some extra things that make you more competitive than the other
Yep.
place. But the extra things you've done for the community, I think, is wonderful. Now, how do you stay on top of what you need to do? I mean, obviously you use social media because you're of that age. You grew up with social media, and you use that. How important is that to use those kinds of tools to be competitive?
I think it is important because the younger generation is on social media, and that's who I'm serving. So I do think that that is important to connect with them that way. But just in general, as far as staying on top, I'm a competitive person, and you know, if you get fat and lazy, you're not going to be in a good position for very long. So I know there's always people chasing me, just like I'm trying to chase someone and try to get to that next level. So my nose is always to the grindstone, and I think it's important to work hard, and that's how you really stay on top. You know, another way I would answer that too is I'm always looking for feedback from my tenants and from my contractors. How can I improve my business? What could have I done better to improve your housing experience this year? So I think it's important, regardless of what the business is, to solicit feedback from who your clientele is, because they're the ones that are going to have the suggestions, and try to evolve. Mentioning the social media, 3 years ago I had a tenant move in, and he said, my last landlord, he had an online rent payment system. You don't have that. Well, my generation, we do everything online. You should really get one. I said, that's a great idea. You're right. So the very next day, I started looking into it, and it's actually made my life a lot easier as well.
Right, that's right.
So it's just just because you've done something one way doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way anymore with today's technology.
That's great. So you're not there to collect the rent. You're there
Yep.
to, they just pay it on online. That's wonderful. That's a great suggestion. So what do you think is the long-term outlook for student housing?
Long-term wise, I think it's very good. At the end of the day, I think that in a sense it's a recession-proof business because you don't see colleges going out of business. Rochester, the region, is blessed with some great universities, and their enrollments continue to increase. With that said, though, it is becoming more and more competitive. More and more people are doing it. Long term, though, I'm very optimistic about student housing.
And I think your desire to continue to learn and do the best and being competitive, like you said, is wonderful. So what advice would you give to those who are looking at running rental real estate, whether it's one house or a bunch of houses?
I would say do your research. I see more often than not people that watch those HGTV shows and they say, oh, this is so easy, and then I'll watch them overpay for a house, or they overestimate what a property will yield via rental. So I would definitely advise to make sure you do your research. Have a focus, have a game plan. Specialize in, say, a particular neighborhood or a niche. Don't just go buy anything, which I see a lot of people often do. So I would say the more time you put into it as far as research, the better you're going to do. And definitely understand the finances and all the numbers. You want to have a good hold as far as what will the rent roll be, but then what are the operating expenses? What are the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance? What's my mortgage payment going to be? What happens if it sits vacant for a month or two? Will I be able to make that mortgage payment? So make sure you really analyze the numbers.
Okay, so not just attractive and potential for hammering and changing walls and things like that, but really know the numbers that go along with it.
Absolutely.
And have contingency plans, like you said, what if there's vacancy for a couple of months, so that's great, that's great. I want to thank you for taking the time to share your experience. You've been very successful in the last few years. I know you'll be very successful in the future. I am grateful on behalf of the community that what you do, because so many people just go in and not really think about what they're doing, what it means to the community, and I think that's brilliant. And we all have to kind of put our hands together to try to help each other out, and I think that's brilliant what you're doing, so more power to you.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And thank you, our viewers, for joining us. My guest is Scott Beck, and he is the owner of Rochester Student Housing, and I do thank him for the time that he spent with us. Until next time, I'm Nanette Nokan, and this is It's About Money.